All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the MidWeek Check-In. My name is Travis Jones and I'm the Minister of Spiritual Formation at Hillside UMC. It's my honor to welcome you this afternoon. We're going to have a great midweek check-in today. As you're coming online on YouTube Live here, you can throw some comments up and let us know where you're watching from. Before we get too far into things, what I want to do is I want to put up some of the upcoming things that are getting ready to happen. I'll throw those up now. So today is Wednesday, and we're doing that midweek check-in. So we're going to start in the middle. It's today, Wednesday at 5 p.m. is our senior high, otherwise known as TNT, and they'll be meeting on Zoom. If you've got a student and you'd like to get them connected with our senior high, it's a great way to do it. Again, today at 5 p.m. Also, Friday, don't want you to forget, Worship Life Live. That's coming up with Sean and Chris. It's going to be an awesome time of worship and a good way to start the weekend and prepare our hearts for worship as we move into Sunday. Also, Sunday at 8:30 a.m. for those of you who have little ones, our remote clubhouse will be running on Facebook Live at Hillside UMC's Facebook Live page or Facebook page. And then, as always, our 9:30 a.m. modern worship and our 11 a.m. traditional worship will be on Facebook Live, YouTube, as well as our website. You can watch them in all of those places. And just so you know, this coming Sunday is actually Communion Sunday. We'll observe the sacrament, and so I want to encourage you to make sure you have some juice and some crackers or bread or something like that at home, so you can observe it at home as we move through that sacrament in both our modern and traditional service. So it's going to be an awesome time. I want to say again, welcome for coming online right now. This is our first time broadcasting on YouTube Live. So again, if I don't think we're going to have any issues with that today, so we're doing that so more people can actually become a part of the conversation versus some of the Facebook elements of things. So before we get started, I want to welcome our guest today. Our guest is Greg Faber, and I'm going to bring Greg up right now, and I'm going to unmute you. Greg, you are now unmuted, sir. So you're live with us. And Greg Faber is the chair of our SPRC, which is our Staff Parish Relations Committee, otherwise known as our personnel group. Greg, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
I jokingly tell people when we go through our membership class, we're going through all the committees and groups that we have. When I get to Staff Parish Relations, I go through it. I give the letters and stuff, and then I go, "Who's seen The Office?" People raise their hand, and I say, "Toby. He did HR, right?" I said, "We have a group of Tobys, but they're loved, unlike Toby was on The Office, right?" So they do all kinds of stuff with personnel and things like that. So Greg and I are going to be going through the discussion questions from last week's sermon. But before we get into that, I always like to ask a fun question. And if you're watching with us on YouTube Live, I want you to throw your answers, and we'll put them up as well. The question is, if you could travel anywhere in the world and expense was not an issue, where would it be and why? So I'll let you answer it first.
Oh, wow. I've given that some thought in the past because I used to travel to Europe a good bit with an employer that I had. And after having done that, I would say that the biggest place I would want to go probably is to Utah and some of the natural monuments in the Grand Canyon to look at what God has put together, regardless of expense.
That's a good answer.
Thank you.
That's a really good answer. See, that makes me, I'm starting to think about my answer, because my answer I go back to when I was a little boy. And I used to, one of my favorite things as a little boy was always like space, the moon, all that stuff. And it's so interesting to me. And when I heard there was going to be a Space Force, I was like, my dreams have become reality. If expense was no option and I could visit anywhere, I would just want to go to outer space just once to kind of get a feel or a float or see what it's like. And that's a weird one, but that's been my thought since I was little, just to go see what the Earth looks like from way, way up there and prove all those flat Earth people wrong. That's what I wanted to do. So let's see what we've got. We've got anybody coming online right now. Again, YouTube Live is a little different, so we're gonna wait and get some comments rolling through. As people are coming online, again, I have Greg Faber with me. He's our the leader of our personnel group at Hillside UMC. Greg, would you like to tell us kind of what you guys do as a part of that committee while we're waiting for some folks to come online?
Well, the biggest thing is to make sure that the structure is put in place for the optimal management of our staff and our pastors, to make sure that we as an employer are set up to actually manage the relationships with each of those people in the most effective manner. We maintain things like the personnel handbooks, all of the policies and procedures having to do with human resources. Our pastor. We review things like all of the job descriptions. Mm-hmm. When we don't determine whether someone needs to be hired or not, but we just make sure that all of the things are put in place to most effectively manage those hires once they are on board.
Yeah, and that's an important job. That's an important job. I know we have to get job descriptions to you guys quite a bit to make sure that they actually flow like they're supposed to and connect. So looks like we've got some people coming online right now. I'm actually taking a look and watching right now on my phone as well, so I can get a good idea. So it looks like we've got 9 folks with us as people come online. So let's do this. Let's jump into our sermon discussion questions. This week's sermon I thought was really awesome. Not that any of the rest of them aren't, but I sit and I listen and I try to actually come up with sermon questions. I used to ask Herzen to send me his sermon and I would pour through it, but then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to listen, and what speaks to me, I think, will probably speak to other people. So I come up with these questions and then we discuss them on here. And if you're watching with us online, we'd love for you to answer these questions as well with us, because these are designed with you in mind as well, right? So our first question is this. It says, is it difficult to recognize Jesus in another person, is what I wrote. I don't know if that translated over. Is it difficult to recognize Jesus in another person? How do you know when you've seen him? That's a good one. You can go for that one.
Who's going first?
You can. See, that's the joy of hosting, means I can present the hard question to the guest.
I would have to say that, is it difficult to recognize Jesus in others? At times when my humanness gets in the way. Mm-hmm. I think all of us react to other people either through their attitudes, through their facial expressions, their body language. And there's sometimes when people just put us off, and we get so focused in what jerks they are that we forget what kind of jerks we are.
Amen.
And that blocks many times, I think, our ability to perceive Jesus in others.
Yeah.
And it takes, I personally, I think it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
To be able to put all that to one side and just say, okay, let me look at this person the way Jesus would have looked at them, and see the personality come through their eyes, and look at them with Jesus' love as opposed to our own social inadequacies, I would call it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's when I see people a lot of times, especially because I'm just as difficult as any other person out there, but when I have any type of difficulty with other people, I have to really work hard to get past my lens that I'm looking at the person through. Because usually I look at a person through the lens of me, and that's usually why I get irritated with the person, because I don't know it, but I see me in them and the things that I don't like. And so it I think it can be because it is getting past us in a sense. It's getting past our own humanness. But you can tell when you've I've had those moments where I've seen Jesus in operation in somebody, and I've walked away and I went, whoa, like I know that person, and what just happened was so far beyond even me and them that I know it was him. Right? Have you ever had one of those moments where you can just tell, right? You didn't even have to set your humanness aside. It just was like in your face there.
Well, yeah, you see somebody operating well beyond your expectation of them,
Yeah.
and they come out with something, and it's just kind of like you just stand there, you're just completely lost for an answer.
Yeah. Yeah. That happens to me a lot. I'm speechless a lot when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, and again, guys, the question was, do you think it's difficult to recognize Jesus in others? Because Jesus is in us if we are believers, and recognizing him can be hard because it's our own mess that's going on a lot of times, at least from our perspective. So if you have comments, throw them up there, and we'll put them out there. Let's see here. We have some comments that are coming through now, and we'll put those out here in just a second. So our second question, and again, this is for those watching as well. Hey, Marion, see you watching right now. Marion Scranton's watching. The second question is: following Jesus is not about us. In today's selfie culture, and I hate selfies. I hate them. Like I almost feel obligated to do them. I hate them so bad. But in today's selfie culture, we like to hear our own voice more than his. How has that been a problem in your own life? Now I'll start this one off. Um, I hate selfies. Like I can't stand the idea of selfies because when you put a selfie out, and we do live in a selfie culture, but when you put a selfie out, you pick your best side, right? You hold up that phone and you don't pick the side that you don't want anybody to see. You pick the best side, and you pick that best side because that's how you want to be portrayed. And we have a culture of nowadays where people want to be portrayed a certain way, and so they like their best side. They don't like all the other ifs, ands, and buts that go with them. And with that comes the love of their own voice, right? Lovers of self type thing. So for me, even though I hate that selfie culture, I love the sound of my own voice. I mean, like, and the problem is I love the sound of my own voice, and sometimes I become my own source. And when I become my own source, things fall apart around me instead of listening to the voice of the one who matters. So that's my answer to it. What do you think, Greg?
Um, I'd have to say that a lot of us were brought up in a culture of the fact that we are responsible for our own success.
Mm, bootstraps.
We don't mention the fact that we're responsible for our own failures either.
Yep.
But it's, if it's gonna happen, it's all up to us.
Mm,
And we forget that we are dependent on so many others in the world, in that thing that forms community, but also that we're dependent on a good relationship with God and with Jesus. That once we understand that it's not all about us, that we become, I think, much more effective in the world because we become perceived as giving people rather than taking people.
yeah. Yeah. Marion says, I'm going to put this to the broadcast. She says, it's hard to tune everything out to listen to God. I hate my own voice. That's what Marion says. And we've got some other ones that are popping up. People are coming online with us right now. Um, one of my favorite quotes, I forgot who said it. But you were talking about, we like to, it's like a bootstrap culture, right? Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and you're responsible for your success. But we do forget that failures, we're responsible for those too. And one of the things that all my failures have in common is me. I was there for all of them. Like, so just as much as I like to think that I'm in for this, I'm in for that as well. So that's a neat way to look at it. Let's see if we got some more folks coming on. Our moderator says, anyone else love the sound of their own voice? LOL. I think she thought that was funny. Like she must think that's Lauren moderating for us right now. So I'll probably never hear the end of that. So question number 3. It says in Luke's narrative, the disciples' eyes were opened while breaking bread with Jesus. How have you experienced this personally?
Those of you that know me know that I'm a big fan of what we call Walk to Emmaus, which is a 3-day or a 72-hour opportunity to go away on a spiritual adventure with some other like-minded people, guided by people who have already been through this and who have practiced the walk and sponsored all the activities. It's a weekend of 15 pre-planned and practiced talks, each individual, so that there's kind of like a loose scripting for each of the talks
Mhm.
and some guidelines, but each is individual to the person that's actually offering it or speaking it. And without getting into the history of why I was there, because it was just kind of an embarrassment, but we went with three or four other guys that were from Hillside, and then there were a lot of people that were there that actually worked to put it on to be the servants for the weekend. And it's kind of a really meaningful opportunity also to see your friends working to serve you. But in that process, in these 15 talks, it was interesting that we had two guys that were presenting their presentations. One was the owner of a Ford dealership, and the other one was one of the mechanics at that same Ford dealership.
Mm.
And yet, at during the walk to Emmaus, they were completely equal to one another. And it's kind of one of these things where you looked at that and you say, the guy who owned the dealership set everything aside and was walking spiritually with his brother, who was one of his lead mechanics. And it's just, you got to give that some thought when you stop and you think about, wow, that's really what the kingdom's all about. All the facades are put aside, and you deal with people who relate to one another and also to the group as well.
Yeah.
Um, there's one of the activities in that weekend where you have an opportunity to spend some alone time with Jesus.
Mm.
And I don't want to steal the surprise or anything, because that's one of the things that is about Emmaus, is that we don't advertise everything that goes on. Otherwise, you take all the surprises away. But in that period of time, I was in the chapel alone with this large wooden cross. And we call it spending time at the foot of the cross. And I would have to say that it was at that point when Jesus really entered my life.
Mm.
And just made a tremendous difference. That's when I stopped playing church and started doing church.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit about Emmaus here in a bit. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was one of our question line after we get done with some of the discussion stuff. For me, I remember I had a pastor who, when I was going to church, I wasn't, doing it. And he used to talk about getting in your prayer closet all the time. And so I was very young, and I started taking him literally. So I went home and got in my closet. And so, here I am in the closet with clothes and shoes and everything else. And I'm like, this is going to be my prayer closet. And I got in there, and the alone time, the quiet time. I would start it off. And this is the funny part again, because I like to hear the sound of my own voice. I would start talking. And eventually it got to a place where I would go in and sit and just listen. And when I would just sit in my prayer closet and listen, so much more came out of it for me. And when a question talking about how how I've experienced that personally, it was in those moments like that. It was the alone time. It was where I wasn't talking, where I was listening, and my eyes were more opened in those times than I can even count. And I look fondly back on those times, and even in the middle of those times, I sometimes miss them. So I have to catch myself and know that I need to do that more. I need to get alone, right? I need to go back to where it started, kind of thing. So that's where it started for me. That's where the answer to that question lies for me. With that, we have some folks that have asked for the questions. Just so you know, the questions, I post those questions to our church app, so they're there. They are also on our website. These questions at the hillsideumc.org, and you can go to the spiritual formation page, and down at the bottom they're there. You can get those as well, and I think our moderator is going to be typing those up there for you as well. Question number 4. Um, Talk about a time when you felt like the scriptures were speaking directly to you in a church service. And where that question came from, Herzen was talking. I think he mentioned, have you ever, something to the effect of, have you ever felt like the pastor was talking to you, right? Or the scriptures were reading your mail that day, though the pastor didn't call you up and discuss the sermon. You know what I'm saying? So I'll let you answer that if you'd like.
I think that most of the time when I feel that the scriptures are talking to me are when uh, you actually are getting the words of Jesus.
Mm.
When he was speaking to the crowds or speaking to the individual apostles or disciples, there's times when you just get a little uncomfortable
Yeah.
because that incoming is just getting too close to the target,
Yeah.
which is obviously the intent.
Mm.
But I would say that if you were to look at everything as far as those most meaningful things, we did a church-wide study several years ago by Max Lucado, and it was called Next Door Savior.
Mm.
And one of the activities, it was a great study, but one of the activities that we did in church was that several people put together a skit.
Mm-hmm.
And in the skit, uh, one of the guys was Jesus, and he was just wearing a blue jumpsuit, and he was the trash man. And people would come in dragging their bags of trash and leave them with him, spend a little bit of time, and then they would get up with their heads held down, and they would pick up their bag of trash and walk back out again, completely missing the point that Jesus said, "Cast your burdens on me." And it was just, and the study and the sermon and the words kept coming back about when you bring your stuff to Jesus, leave it there. He's much stronger than you are. He's much more capable than you are. And by casting your burdens on him, then pick up his yoke and carry his yoke with you, because that burden is light. And that's probably one of the most memorable things that I'm still carrying with me from that whole process.
Felt like it spoke to you like right there in the moment, right?
Oh yeah, really loud.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had, and you do remember those. They make an impression. It's almost like an impression on your heart when because that's where he speaks to. I've had several um, when I was younger. I always go back to when I'm younger because I mean he speaks now to me and I hear scriptures, um, but I remember a lot more of them from when I was younger, and I would be sitting in church with my parents because I didn't want to be there. And that's where I remember getting hit so many times. It was like arrows right there, and because my parents good intentions. We want you to go to church, and I would go and I'd sit there, right? My grandma would give me chewing gum because that's what grandmas do in church, and you're not supposed to chew gum in church. But she would give me chewing gum, and the pastor would be delivering his message, and one arrow after another hit hit. And I so much so to the point where I walked out one time and said to my mom, "Did you tell him what happened this week?" And she goes, "No." And I'm like, "Okay, there's either something to this or you're lying. One of these two things are, And so it got to be. I honestly, when I was younger, I thought that my parents were having weekly conversations with the pastor because of how often it was just nailing me right in the chest. So, and I remember almost every single one of those too. So I guess, for me, speaking nowadays, I do that whole thing where I'll open up the Bible and I'll say, okay, God speak one thing. If I'm going to read until you highlight one thing for me, and without fail, boop, he pops up. And sometimes for a week or two, I don't go anywhere else because that scripture's still dealing with me. And I let it deal with me because, I mean, if I try to rush past it, I'm going to repeat it or repeat the need for it, I guess is the way to put it. So I guess that's my answer to the question. Let's look at some answers we have here online here. So one of our questions previous, Jim Hooper said, he said, I walk each morning spending time in prayer. I'm in awe that the Lord walks with me. I'm in agreement with that. It's hard for me to believe that that I get to walk with him as well, based off some of the stuff that I've walked through in my life. Right. We got some more comments coming through, but while they're coming through, let's move on to the next question. Um, there's something special about community and communion that allows us to see that Jesus is present with us. How has the sacrament of communion and the participation in community allowed you to see Jesus? Explain. That's a long two-parter. You take them one or the other, or both.
Well, there's times when I would say that communion is it's meaningful, but it's just meaningful. It's not, it's one of those things where you go down, you go through the ritual,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's a big deal, sometimes it's not. But there's other times when I go down and as I take the elements and look in the face of the person who's serving me those elements, and you feel that connection that this person really is a servant of Christ who is providing for me the elements of a meaningful relationship with Jesus, and it really hits home.
Yeah.
And it's just I think it all depends many times on our mindsets going into that opportunity.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the busyness of the world, and to be able to put that aside during the communion um, activity is I think really one of those integral things that's hard for us to do. But it goes back to many of the other points that were made earlier on, and it's when do we allow ourselves to become quieted to the point where we're open and receptive to the voice of Jesus?
That's so. On that note, how hard do you think it is to quiet ourselves?
I think it's almost impossible. There's a trick or a tactic that we use in instruction, and it's called a 30-second rule.
Mhm.
And you can ask a question, and you don't get a response. I mean, there's times when you look out at your class and you just see eyeballs, and that's it. But if you wait for 30 seconds, it's almost a guarantee that no one can let 30 seconds of silence go by without saying something. And that's kind of one of the interesting things that you run into, is that when you try and be quiet, all of these things of the world start to bubble up.
Yeah.
And it's just tough to quiet yourself. It's a technique that you learn over time,
Yeah.
but sometimes we're not real good at it.
Oh, I'm yeah. Like last night, I was laying in bed, and about midnight, little girl wanted to eat, so fed little baby, put her back to sleep, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go back to sleep, and I sat there, and my mind, like it ran, and I couldn't get it to quiet. Even in the silent, like the quietness of the night, there was still a lot of noise that was flying around. So I think it can be very, very hard. If you're watching with us online, do you think it's hard? Do you think it's hard to be quiet? I agree with your 30-second thing. I almost said I was going to wait 30 seconds before responding, just to give everybody that awkward, because it's awkward. Right?
It is.
It's awkward, but I think God is trying to teach us something in the awkwardness. And I've always said that when things are awkward, He's trying to show you something about you in that moment. And I almost did that, but I didn't. But if you're watching online, do you think it's hard to be quiet, to be still and know, really, is what we're talking about in that moment, just to be still and know? Because when we're still, we will get to know Him, but some things about us come to the surface too. And I think that's what gets us uncomfortable sometimes. That wasn't one of our questions, but it was a good offshoot into the questions there. So, what about community? Now, I know you've taught disciple. You before COVID-19 decided it wanted to show up. You had a Wednesday night class that was running. That you were doing a Bible study as well. So I know you know the importance of community. But the second part of that question is, um, how have you how have you been able to see Jesus in that community?
Oh, that's an easy one. I mean, at least as far as I'm concerned, is the people with whom I interact at church and even those outside. You can see Jesus' hand in so many of the activities, And when you take the time to really, I think, consider the person and to look in their eyes, and that's going back to communion. Many times when one of the communion servants is someone who's in one of our classes or someone with whom I interact on a personal basis, and you can put that personality aside and you look in their eyes and you really see in there the depth of the soul of the individual.
Mhm.
It just makes all the difference.
Yeah, I would agree. We say community is important. I don't really think a lot of us know how important it is. Uh,
Well, we're learning, aren't we?
yeah, well, yeah, yeah. You and I were talking beforehand about just this massive influx of connectivity via the digital medium right now. That didn't really. It was happening to some extent, but not like it is now, out of necessity, right? And how people have just jumped on that, and where there's a desire for it, there's a way. But even in that, I still don't think people realize the depth and need for us to connect. Um, because of that whole bootstrap culture that we have, like we can do it on our own type stuff. So yeah, I think community's super important because we weren't made to live alone, right? I mean, in Genesis, first thing he said wasn't good. That man was alone, and so he remedied that, right? So again, if you're watching with us, the second part of that question was, how have you seen Jesus in community? And so we'd love to see your answer pop up there as well. And our moderators putting up some of these questions for you as well. Our sixth question is this: It says, God is not worried about what we think about Sunday morning service. That's a hard pill for some of us to swallow, because Sunday morning services are about Him. Have you ever thought of a church service in this light? That's a stir in the pot question. Is what that is.
We went through at Hillside several years ago. We went through a period of time where the focus was on the presentation and not the product. If you want to take that to mean it was all about the show,
Mm-hmm.
how could we maximize the number of people in the seats by having the greatest show of Christian performance that you could possibly think of? And at some point, we turned a corner.
Mm-hmm.
And we started saying, hey, instead of trying to be the big performance church with the spinning lights and all the magic stuff, we need to focus on becoming the community church, and the church that services families in the community and goes out and does the right thing and hosts food pantries and Easter egg hunts. And we become a focus of community for the overall residents, that the people who live around us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has really made a big change in the attitude and the way that Hillside is perceived in the community. It's no longer a place where you go for the Sunday morning show. It's a place where you go for the week-long um, community of people, and people who just actually step up and love one another. And I think it's made a big difference.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I wasn't there for the part you mentioned, but coming when I first started at Hillside, I noticed there was a difference in the other churches that I'd served. And not that they were bad or the Hillside was good, but there was just a difference in the communal aspect. There was more of it that I'd witnessed, and I served at a great church prior to coming, and we would do community and things like that, but there was just a difference when I came to Hillside, and that difference is one of the reasons that I was like, this is a place that I want to be a part of, because I could see that. I remember sitting at a men's ministry meeting, my first one, my first actual meeting at Hillside. Before I actually even started, I went to this meeting with them, and before the meeting started, they wanted to pray, which is people do before meeting starts, and they did. But there was something about the way they even engaged in prayer as a group that I had not readily experienced prior to that. And it was this community. It wasn't like just one person was just the one praying for everybody else, and everybody was holding hands. And at the end, you did the Christian tug, like, "Oh, we're good." That's the we're holding hands release thing at the end of prayer. It wasn't that normal that I had experienced. It was a group with one person speaking that was actually offering this up, and so it was. I thought it was amazing, and almost every meeting I've been at since then, I've had that same feeling, and so for me, that whole communal aspect and then the whole God not being worried. One of my favorite statements was, people will they'll go to lunch and have the pastor for lunch afterwards after a church service, and they'll critique the service and whatnot. And I saw a little meme on Facebook pop up, and somebody was saying to the pastor, "Well, I didn't really like worship today." And the response from the pastor was, "Well, that's good. It wasn't for you." Right? Which people like immediately go, wait a minute. That's right. It wasn't for me. So I mean, I've experienced that at Hillside, that there's a truth in that people understand that worship isn't about us. It's a lifestyle, but it's not. It's about Him. The services are about Him. It's not a country club. It's a place where when I call this home, I give up my seat so that somebody else may experience it. It's a place of serving. Anyway. I'll get a little bit passionate about it, start rattling on if I'm not careful. So again, love to hear my own voice, right? So I wonder if you're out there. Have you ever thought of church in that light? Have you ever thought of a service in that light that the morning service is about Him and not about us? Because I think so many times we go into our services thinking, "What can I get out of this?" Or boy, Lord, I need this. When He's like, "I know what you need before you even ask. If you'll just come and sit in my presence, I'll meet that need." So there's some questions. Now, so those are some questions. I want to throw one of our responses up. Jenny Hurt, our children's minister's on here, and she was talking about being quiet and being still. And she says, yes, I've went on a retreat where we started each session with 30 minutes of silent listening. It was so hard. I'll bet. You ever want to put that into practice? Go to meet somebody whenever we can ever meet in public again, whenever Starbucks opens, and just sit there for 30 minutes and look at them. Let's see how long that goes. Right? That'd be a difficult thing to do. What do you think, Greg?
We can't get past 30 seconds.
Yeah, amen. So let's start off with 30 seconds then and see if we can get past that. But I think that would still be pretty awkward, just to sit there for 30 seconds.
It's a long, long time.
Yeah, it's an eternity. So let's shift gears away from the sermon questions real quick, and let's go back to Emmaus. You mentioned Emmaus, and you gave us a description. And we, in the service this past Sunday, the scripture had to do with the walk to Emmaus, and it had to do with the two of the guys that were walking. They didn't know who they were talking to, but later turn around and go, "Weren't our hearts on fire when He was speaking?" Right? And so I've not been on a walk to Emmaus, and I've heard you talk about it. I've heard Kendall Nickens talk about it. So, what is a walk to Emmaus designed to do?
Well, I mentioned that we have the 15 pre-planned talks.
Right.
Each on that's the educational portion of the walk. And I think each of those are very, very meaningful. And there's group activities, and there's a lot of things that have to do with focusing on the talk and then actually working in a table group to make the reinforcement of that talk and pick out the salient points and that sort of thing. Meals together obviously are a tremendous part of that. In our walk to Emmaus, and they are different regionally, but in the North Georgia walk to Emmaus, the men go one weekend, the women go the following weekend. Optimally, it is in a married couple, it would be the men go first, and then the women would go the second week, because men can be quiet about their experience because we don't share well anyway. but the women just find it very difficult because of the really soul searching that sometimes goes on. It's hard to not express and to want to share with someone. But anyway, that's just the structure of it.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate in that we have our own retreat center.
Cool.
So you spend the weekend there, not only in the talks and the table activities, but then in table time, getting to meet the table partners and spending some time in Christian discussion and developing sort of the sorts of attitudes that are necessary, but then also going into chapel time and having some real in-depth opportunities to experience time with Jesus. And I have never been to what we call a closing ceremony, which is a wrap up at the end where each of the individuals gets to speak for a couple of minutes and talk about what impact the walk has made to them. They all turn out to be very, very emotional moments. I mean, it's just things where you're deeply steeped into something where you go to a lot of retreats and there's fun activities and things like this. And this isn't a whole lot different than that,
Mm-hmm.
but it really is an opportunity to do some solid soul searching.
That's a
So
that's a good.
starts on Thursday night,
Mm-hmm.
winds up on Sunday afternoon. So that's the 72 hours. We call it 3 days, but it's actually over 4 calendar days of an opportunity for people to spend some time in reflection and also to learn some good stuff and to learn about yourself. And that's, I think, one of the real important things that comes out of this.
One of the out of everybody I've talked to, and even having not spoken to anybody prior to talking to them about Emmaus, one of the things I picked up on real quick was one of the meaningful sides of it, and they're probably it's probably like a diamond. There are many different facets of meaningfulness that come out of a walk to Emmaus, but one of the things that I've noticed is the community that exists around Walk to Emmaus and the people that come out of a walk and the community that they feel a part of. Like the experience itself generated this connectivity that maybe otherwise may not have been there for them prior. So I'm not sure I have a question about that other than more I've picked up on that with people.
Yeah, it's a good observation. I think one of the things to look at that's particularly interesting about Walk to Emmaus as opposed to Trace Diaz or Cosio or some of the predecessor, which are still very functional. One's Baptist focused, one's Catholic focused. It does come out of the Catholic Crescio movement.
Hmm.
Walk to Emmaus actually spun off of a Crescio movement that was brought by some Spanish Air Force officers to Texas. And that's really was the heart of the movement here in the United States. But rather than being particular like just Methodist, Walk to Emmaus is an ecumenical movement. So you'll find on one of our walks to Emmaus, not only do we have a lot of Methodist churches involved, but a lot of independent churches, Baptist, Catholic. It's not unusual in our walks here to see a lot of people that will come from the local Catholic churches. And I mean, and they've got Crescio, but they prefer in many instances to be involved in the broader Christian community. And that I think makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean,
because it's a sharing of experiences.
yeah, and it sounds like that. That's what I've noticed with folks. Marion Scranton says Emmaus was the best experience ever. That's so. Marion, I'm gonna agree with you on that. Even though I haven't been, I'm gonna agree with you in faith right now that it's one of the best experiences ever. So, and I hear that from people. I hear you've got to go. That's what I hear all the time. And my other favorite thing I hear is when are you gonna go? Right? You've got to go, and when are you gonna go? And
that was Kendall Nicka's question.
Yeah. Well, yeah. He always says they're always coupled. They hold hands. It's you got to go, and when are you going to go? That's always the thing. And so I hear that a lot from people. So I know that it's a huge thing. It's an awesome thing. So if you were going to encourage somebody to go? If somebody had heard about it and was considering it, what would you say to them?
Well, personally, for me, it was one of the most meaningful Christian experiences I've ever been involved in. Um, and I think, as such, what we find that there's some people that say you got to go because you need this experience to address some issue in your life or some problem that you're having. And I would say, if that's your purpose for going, don't go.
Okay.
Get that resolved first, because you need to go on the walk with an open heart and an open mind and be ready to accept things that may not be quite what you'd expect. But at the end of that process, you'll find that this whole attitude about be still,
Mm-hmm.
know that I am God. You learn a little bit about how to do that while you're there. You will have opportunities to be quiet and other opportunities to be active and be involved in other people's lives and understand what their viewpoints are and enhance your own personal prayer life through praying for others. So I could not recommend it more highly for any number of reasons. But the attitude is right, and you'll be all set. You mentioned community.
Yeah.
It's also fair to mention that there is a gathering uh, every month or so. Generally in November, we host a gathering at Hillside
Mm-hmm.
for the entire North Georgia community, or anybody else who's welcome. For those people who have not yet been, find somebody in our Emmaus community and have them take you to a gathering. They're not closed.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to see this concept and this sense of community, and just the absolute love that these people have for one another is just absolutely amazing.
And maybe that's what, when I hear people say you need to go and when are you going to go, that's that desire for someone else to experience what you just described, that's coming through when they're talking about that. So we've still got some questions popping through, and they'll continue to pop through with that. What I've done, and if you've downloaded the questions online, if you're watching with us, at the bottom it says if you would like more information about Walk to Emmaus, or maybe even considering it. I put my email address there, but Greg, if there's another way that somebody wanted information or wanted to contact, uh, could they contact you as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Myself, Harry Booth, Kendall Nickens, wherever you feel comfortable. I mean, we don't walk around with a special badge on our shirt to let you know that we've been.
Yeah.
Um, it's the community at Hillside is a lot broader than you would think, but certainly anybody's always welcome to contact me. If you don't want to talk to somebody,
Yeah.
but you want to let your fingers do the walking, you can go to ngwte.org, North Georgia Walk to Emmaus.org. And on that, you'll find some descriptions of the walks themselves, the schedules, the gathering schedules, and some things like that. But I really think the best information you'll get will be to speak to someone who has been on a walk, who can tell you from their experience what it meant to them. And it'll be, once they start talking, though, I'll have to warn you, you got to reserve at least 10 minutes.
Oh, I would say probably longer than 10.
Yeah,
Probably longer than 10. So, and guys, if you are interested and you email me, I'm going to actually forward you to one of these guys or ladies. We have ladies, I guess, that are a part of this too.
Absolutely.
We also have there's a student component as well. Is there not? Isn't it called Chrysalis?
Yes, there is a chrysalis, which is the emerging butterfly concept.
Mm-hmm.
There's also so that'll handle the I would say sophomores, juniors, seniors in high school, that age group.
Yeah.
Those flights, we call them, will be held like 4 times a year so that they work with the school schedules.
Right.
But then also for the elder community who don't feel comfortable in going away for Thursday through Sunday, there is another activity called face to face that will be 2 days during the week for 2 consecutive weeks. So it's 4 days total. Ending starts at a somewhat civil, like 9:30 in the morning, and will run until about 3 in the afternoon, so that you can commute back to home. You don't stay away from home, but in those 4 days, they still touch on all of the primary activities that you would get from the period of a walk to Emmaus. It's a little bit easier to take for people who are perhaps mobility impaired
Hmm.
or don't want to be away from the house
Right.
for that length of time.
Now I know that the I guess the walks right now are on hold because of the current state of things, and I'm sure when they I mean, I know they're scheduled into the fall if I'm not mistaken already. Um,
Correct.
you can view those at that ngwte.org, right?
That's true, but then we'll also get them with on the church website as well.
Okay. Yeah.
As soon as we have confirmation that the schedule is going to be firm, we'll publish those so that they're readily available, and also some contact points.
Awesome. Well, at this point, I'm going to give you the last word and a word of encouragement for everybody there. But before I do that, our moderator in text has put out if you need or want to contact Greg or anybody else about the Walk to Emmaus, just to make it easy right now, you can just email me at tjones@hillsideumc.org, and I'll get you over to them ASAP. So they can start that conversation with you without having to give that out, their information out right now. So Greg, if last word for you, would you like to say anything encouraging to our audience as we? I said it last week to the counselors that it feels like there's a light at the end of the tunnel with the current state of things, and I know most people are hoping it's not a train that's coming. So that being said, there's probably still a lot of anxious people out there. What would you say to encourage them right now?
Well, I have seen it stated in many places. This too shall pass. If you go down and you look at the 1918, and there's a lot of stuff that's starting to come out on the websites about the 1918 pandemic. That we all recovered from that. The national economy is recovered. Uh, it's just be patient, be cautious, be aware, and be considerate of your neighbors, because not everybody is as comfortable with all this process as everybody else. I live in a community of people who are out walking without masks, and they feel very comfortable, but they're very respectful of the personal space. And you've got some others who aren't. I would say that accept it as your responsibility to maintain what they call social distancing.
Yeah,
Don't leave it up to the other guy, because they may not be as well behaved as you are.
ain't that the
But that we're going to get through this, and coming out the other side, we won't be exactly the same, but I think we'll be stronger for it.
wise words? I tell my wife all the time. Greg Faber is always dripping with wisdom. No matter when I talk to you, it's just dripping from you. So the moderator
Dripping
put
is
out
one word, yeah.
the moderator just put this out, so I'm gonna put it up on the hashtag. This too shall pass. Right? She's throwing that out there right now. So
Thank you, Lauren.
yeah, amen. So, Greg, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us on this midweek check-in, and I'm going to go ahead and put you over to the side for just a second. And again, thank you. We just took in 53 minutes of your time right now that you could be doing something else, but you connected with our church body and me, and so I appreciate that. So, again, thank you, thank you, thank you.